Welcome, everyone. Today I'm talking with the awesome Richard Paul Evans.
Hi, everyone. I'm here in my room.
It's a pretty awesome room as well.
Yes, you will notice the secret door right there. My favorite part.
I think every author ought to have a secret bookcase door, shouldn't they?
Yes, they should.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. And why don't we start off? We're going to do a couple of quick questions just to kick this off. So first of all, what books have you written, Richard?
I've written 31 books, so I'm not going to go through them. My first book was The Christmas Box. It was a little Christmas story I wrote for my kids, and that's what launched me into the book scene. It sold 8 million copies. It hit #1 in the New York Times, and all of a sudden I thought, hey, I'm a writer. Since that time, I've been doing this a while. It's now my 31st novel is just about done, and that's part of the Michael Bay series, which is my first young adult series.
Well, and that leads into our next question. What genres do you tend to write in?
Well, my genres have always been literature, and I've won a few awards in romance. But I'm a comic book guy at heart, and so when I did young adult, it wasn't because I was trying to, sell more. It was like because young adult, there was a while there when all the authors were doing young adult because it was like wow, look at Twilight and Harry Potter and it was more a matter of, I'm getting kind of bored. What do I want to write? And what I really wanted to write was about a 15-year-old boy with electricity and relive my childhood the way it should have been. My youth could have been so much better, and I wanted to go back and fix it. So that's what started it.
I just wanted to drag in when I was growing up, so, same thing. So when did you start writing? What year?
Boy, that was 1992. At the time, I was working at an ad agency, and I was writing radio commercials and brochures mostly, and winning awards, locally for these commercials. And then I had some time off. I had just finished a political campaign that we were working on, and so after the second Tuesday, I wasn't about to go find new clients for Christmas, so I just started writing a book, a Christmas story.
And what is it? Not necessarily with your first book, but in general, what is it that got you into writing? Was it just that you loved reading, or was there something specific?
It's a good question because I actually did not like reading. I have Tourette syndrome and an attention deficit disorder, and so I loved having my mom read to me, but I disliked reading. And so when I was older, I thought I'm not a reader. And then one day, the curiosity of why everyone was talking about this book called The Hobbit finally got to me, and I thought, no, that's too thick of a book for me. But I picked it up and started reading, and the next thing I know, I was lost in that world. And so then I started writing myself. I thought, well, I want to expand that world. So kind of the original fan fiction. We didn't have fan fiction venues back then, but I started writing about these hobbits and elves, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I never thought it would be I'd do it as a living. It was just a lot of fun.
I just thinking that a young adult author, I know you've written other things, but writing young adult books with Tourette syndrome, that's got to be an interesting combination.
Yeah, it actually started with one of my adult books. Because I love comic books, I was kind of showing myself when I was writing these adult novels. I wrote a book called The Gift, and it was about a young boy who had the power to heal people. And so I thought, well, let's have the first guy he heals have Tourette syndrome. And because I have Tourette's, and I thought this will be interesting. And then as I'm describing it, I thought, the critics they always expect coprolalia, which is when you start swearing all the time. And that's only 10% of those with Tourette's. Most of us just have tics and things like that. And so I thought, well, I don't want the critics to attack this because of their ignorance. And so I put in the front of the book that I have Tourette's, and I couldn't believe the response. All of a sudden, every interview I'm on CNN, and they're saying, "Okay, tell us about the Tourette's." It's all they wanted to talk about, and that book was so much fun to write because I was writing about a superhero in a way. This boy that had these really cool powers and how the world turned against him. I thought, that was so much fun. I'm going to actually just full out do this, and that's how I came up with Michael Bay. But the Tourette's is actually really cool because I have kids with Tourette's come to every single signing, and also youth with autism. And I'm not sure why the autism piece plays in, but last night I talked to 3 kids with autism.
Wow. Well, do you think that dealing with those, dealing with certain challenges that other people don't, gives people and writers a perspective and a depth to their work that might otherwise be absent?
Absolutely. I mean, we write what we know about, and since I have decades of research on Tourette's, it makes it interesting. And I also had another agenda though. My son Michael, who I wrote the book for, he has Tourette syndrome, and I wanted to make the world a more acceptable place for him. And I'm thinking, wow, if Harry Potter had Tourette syndrome, then Tourette syndrome would be cool. And so when I introduced it to Michael Vey, it actually started to have that effect. I started hearing from kids saying they were being treated better. A young woman at Comic-Con walked up to me and hugged me. She goes, "I love you, Mr. Evans." I said, "Well, great. Why?" She goes, "I have Tourette syndrome like you do, and kids tease me, but they don't tease me anymore because they're all Michael Vey fans, and they think that would be disrespectful."
Wow. That's got to be one of the most rewarding experiences for you to have as an author.
Oh, absolutely. To make someone's life better. The stories I've heard. So one mother wrote me and said my daughter left her room for the first time in weeks because after she had given her Michael Vey, and she said, if Michael Vey can do this, can have courage, I can have courage too.
And I think people underestimate sometimes the importance of having there's no other word for it, but a role model, even if it's fictional, some example to show that it's possible to do something. It's very hard to even conceive that you can do something if there isn't an example of it in your life. Whether it's parents or fiction or movies or whatever the case may be.
Right. That's the power of books.
And the power of stories in general.
Exactly, and which is why politicians, governments fear books, because all of a sudden you write something, and I mean every revolution started with the book. Every single one of them, whether it's religious or cultural or political, there was always a book at the base of it.
Yeah. But you have to have the ideas, and the ideas, you have to write the ideas down. I mean, you don't have to, you can speak them, but in order for them to really gain traction and reach people who can't attend every political rally, you need a book. So, given all the different things you write about, especially young adult and your adult novels and everything, despite the variety, do you find that there is a theme or an image or a feeling or a character or something that you return to in all of your different pieces?
Yes, yeah. There's a sense of hope. I'm actually a very hopeful person, and I think that's what people relate to. My books are not Pollyanna, and they go through horrible things, but I believe that in the end, hope wins. I believe that in the end, love wins.
Boy, I love that. I think that's one of the best answers I've gotten for that question so far.
Thank you.
So how do you write? I mean, like physically, what's your process writing?
I probably have all the worst habits as a writer. So just listen to what I'm saying, then don't do what I do. The problem I have is because I have attention deficit. I get distracted very, very easily. Plants vs. Zombies, the video game, has probably cost me 4 or 5 books.
I beat it.
Yeah, I'm an expert at Plants vs. Zombies, but I start writing down some ideas and sketching them, and I don't go through like detailed outlines until later in the book. I actually just kind of just let it kind of free flow, and then I start typing it up, and then I start reading it, and I have to edit in pencil, in very very sharp pencils. It's weird. It's one of the things with Tourette syndrome is the need to touch sharp objects. So I have sharp things all around me. I'm looking at the sword behind you, and it's like I want to touch it. It's a very strange thing. When the doctor asked me when I was diagnosed, he said, "Do you like to touch sharp things?" I took 7 sharp things out of my pockets. I said, "How did you know that?" He goes, "That's your Tourette's." So I have really sharp pencils. I line them up. So this big thing with sharp pencils, and as soon as it's not sharp, I toss it and grab the next one, and then edit. And now I have my daughter, who's my writing assistant. So I then take those edits, give it to her, and she plugs them into the back in type, and then I just keep going over and over and over it.
But do you also find that working by hand with a pencil activates like a different process, a different part of the brain versus working on a keyboard?
I think it does. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just there's this organic feel to it. And it can't be a pen. I hate pens. It has to be a sharp pencil.
Okay, so you partially answered my next question. In terms of plotting, you mentioned you tend to work your plots out sort of on the fly. So do you have like the initial idea and you just start writing, and then how does that work with you?
God, Someone asked Stephen King how he came up with his ideas for his books, and he said in his book on writing, he said, "I don't, I find them," and it's more like an archaeologist kind of dusting off the bones, and the reporter said, "I don't believe you," and he said, "Well, that's fine as long as you believe that I believe this." And when I read that, I thought that is exactly right. I feel like the stories are already out there. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a story. So I then start exploring it. If I go off on the wrong tangent, it stops coming. And so I believe in muses and inspiration because there's times things hit me and I go, no, you didn't do that. You did not do that, really. So I've had those experiences. One time, it's like one of my characters shouted at her father, and what she said was the most hurtful thing someone could say. And I go, I gasped. I literally gasped, like, you can't say that, you know? And it's like, oh, yeah, she did, and it was pretty cool actually. So I wrote it down.
Well, and isn't it great when the characters surprise you like that?
Yeah, they do, and Michael Vey is. It's a leap of faith. Someone said, "How did you know there's 7 books in the series?" I said, "I have no idea. I just felt it." I did a series called The Walk, and it's about a man who walks across America. And the first big problem is I thought I could write it using Google Maps. I could write it. And I soon realized there's no way. You have to be out there. So I drove from coast to coast. And my daughter and I, over the course of 5 years, we drove all the way across America. It was an amazing experience. But you run into things. Like one time we're driving along and we got caught in a tornado. It's like, I go, wow, I've never seen lightning strike like that except for in a tornado. And it's like, Jenna, find where we are. And we turn on the radio. It's like, if you're in Jackson County, take cover. It's like, where are we? She's like going down the map. And it's like, we're in Jackson County. We stop at the only building, a hotel, and it's filled with people and their dogs and everything. And it's like, okay, that made it to the story. Or like we're driving through Yellowstone and all of a sudden this buffalo walks in front of us. And it's like, so I slow down and then the whole herd comes out. And we're in a little rental car that's half the size of some of these buffaloes, and we're driving along and pretty soon we're part of the herd. We're completely surrounded. I could like pet one. It was pushing so hard against my window. I could actually pet it. And it's like carrying us along. And I had to go at the right speed because I got too close. And one of them turned around and put its head down. It's like, okay. My daughter rolls up the window. It's like, it's not going to do any good. So we were in part of a buffalo herd for 45 minutes. That made it into the book. So, you have to have these experiences as you write.
Makes perfect sense to me. What do you wish you had known starting out?
I wish I hadn't worried so much about critics because like my first book came out, it was amazing how many people were criticizing me on this book, and it hurt my feelings. It's like, well, wait a second. It sold millions of copies, made millions of dollars, and it's like, no, the book doesn't suck. It's like if the book sucked, it doesn't happen. But I'd get letters from people who lived in their parents' basements, and it's like, well, why am I listening to this person? And I could have all these great reviews, and then this one person, and I realized you're never going to please everyone. It's just not going to happen. And so I wish I had understood that. What else? I wish I had understood a little bit more about the business because my first book was like yours was so big, and I wish I had captured more of those names because that first book was it was massive, and I'd have 1,000 people come to a book signing and on a regular basis. We just books, and I never collected their names. I didn't, and it wasn't until the next book. But I go out with the next book, and they would get like these big auditoriums for me to have a book signing, and 12 people would come. And so I felt like I was starting anew, and it took a while to rebuild that because people didn't make the connection. They knew the name of the Christmas box, but they did not know Richard Paul Evans. So it wasn't until about 4 years, my book The Locket, that all of a sudden I'm having crowds again.
And this sort of plays into what you were just saying. What advice would you have for an aspiring author who is starting out now?
Oh, this is a good question. It kind of answers your other question. After I wrote my first book, they offered me millions of dollars for my second book, and more than the first book even. And so I'm thinking, oh, great, I'll just write another bestseller. Oh, and then I can't write it. I'm trying, and it's like I just don't know how to do it. And so one day I'm out writing, and I had this great epiphany. But by this point, my publisher's terrified and thinking maybe this guy's a one-book wonder, and this is it. And I'm thinking maybe I'm a one-book wonder. Maybe that was it. And I'm out walking, and then one day it hits me. I don't know how to write a best-selling book. And that was the moment that I really became a writer, I believe, because I realized that the first book I wrote wasn't to be a bestseller book. I wrote something that was very important to me and from the heart, and it was sincere and honest, and it was real. It was a real story. I wasn't trying to please anyone or meet a market. I was writing about something that was very close to my heart. I was writing about the love between parents and children. And at that moment, I thought, I only know how to write what pleases me. And so at that point, I stopped writing for any audience at all. I stopped thinking about them completely. Would they like this? Would they? No, that the marketing department can handle that after the book's done. But when I write, it's a very personal experience. And for that, in that way, I kind of, every book I've ever written, I thought, well, this one is the one is going to kill me. This is the one that no one's going to read because it is so personal. No one but me will relate to this story. And it seems like the more personal, the more I think they're going to hate it, the more they like it. And so that's what I learned. Be true. You see so many people out there that they're writers in the same way kids play soccer. You know, if you see little kids play soccer, they don't keep their positions. You have a ball and you have a mob, and the ball goes over here and the mob goes over there, and the ball shoots over here, kicked out. They all run over there, and keep your position. If you write fantasy, stay in fantasy. If you want to write Amish love stories, write Amish love stories. But don't chase the ball because by the time you got the ball, it's already going somewhere else.
Well, and I think it's perfectly acceptable to change genres as you've discovered yourself. It just has to be something that you personally feel that you want to do. It's not, like you said, it's not because you're chasing the ball. It's because you really do want to write that romance novel. You really do want to write that detective novel, and not because you think that's what's hot at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. You have to fill it, and like I told you, why I wrote Michael Vey. It's like I really wanted to give the kid with Tourette's the cheerleader. I really, it's like, okay. I mean, I'm living vicariously through this guy, and so I'm loving it. It's like, okay, he gets bullied and he gets to take out the bullies. This is so much fun. And so, and then that transfers on. I'm having a great time writing this book. I'm not thinking about money or contracts. My agent, after I was almost done with the book, I told her that I was working on something. She's like, well, when will you find time? And when she saw it, it's like, this is like longer than your novels. Adult novels. I said, no, it was fun.
So how long do your novels tend to be then, word count wise?
My books tend to be short. I write, because I get bored so easily, I write very sparsely. I go in and I start throwing things away. So they end up usually around, my adult novels around 60,000 words. And Michael Vey is usually around 80,000 words, which nothing for you.
Well, but I think that there's a real sort of gap in the marketplace in the moment because I mean fantasy and science fiction, especially fantasy, has gone in such a huge, massive direction, a direction I participated in myself, that we kind of left behind the books the size you're talking about. I mean, like The Hobbit is I think 75,000 words long, 74,000 words long. Ursula Le Guin's books like A Wizard of Earthsea, it's only like 45,000 words long, and yet you wouldn't want to add anything to it. It's perfectly structured as a novel. So I think that what you're doing is probably perfect, and I'm guessing you don't want to be dragging things out for the reader any longer than necessary, or for yourself, as you just said.
You're absolutely right. And there's also one other thing to consider. I came from an advertising background, and you actually can pick. I mean, I kind of put people in different categories. It's like you have the like the professors, the collegiate, the intelligentsia. I put you in that realm. Okay, you have the intelligentsia, the people who are writing. Then you have the single mothers who are trying to survive, and like Mary Higgins Clark and Anne Rule, and then you have all those, and that kind of encapsulates all the romance writers, all the all the very romantic young women you meet. And then you have the ad guys, and then you have the lawyers, the Baldaccis, the Scott Turow, John Grisham. So the lawyers always write in a certain way. You can read it, it's like, oh, this guy's a lawyer. The ad guys, we have lots of chapters and they're really short. Now we've been writing, I mean, look at Patterson's, the same thing. Anyone who's an ad guy, you can pick it out because we're used to writing things that we're barging in. We're an accident. When that commercial comes on, you go, oh man, I want to watch my show, right? So it has to be as entertaining as the show. So we write in these tidbits that are supposed to be like super titillating really fast. So that's what people say. It's like, wow, I got into your book really fast, and the chapters are short, so they keep reading, going through. That's the ad guy in us. That's the way we think. You get you get the professors, and it's like, I've got a captive audience, got lots of time. We're gonna explore everything and talk about it all. And that's so you can pick, you can look at it, the people's background, and see why they write the way they do.
Well, I'd also add into that the ex-military guys. They all write in a certain way too.
Yes. Oh yes, 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 and yeah, they swear a lot. Yeah.
That too, and lots of descriptions of the equipment being used. I think that's really interesting, and actually, I think there's an approach to writing, of course, which prioritizes language, and everything's about the beautiful sentences and the descriptions and the words and all of that, and then there's the approach that's much more plot oriented and detail oriented, and some people manage to mix the two. It's never an either or, but um, I think. I mean, I'd be curious what you think about this. If you had to choose between beautiful language, ravishing prose, but sort of a boring story, or a good, exciting story and pedestrian prose, which one would you choose?
Well, it's a great question because it's the one I've asked myself. I love prose. I love poetry, um, but I can't slow a story down. The story has to move, period. So I go through and just slash like crazy. I hate the term, but people call it drowning your babies. It's like you have to pull out these things you love. What I did is I created the morgue, and I take these things that I really love that slow the story down, and I move it into the morgue because I just can't bear to throw them away. And then what I do in my adult novels is I have diary entries. And so at the beginning of every single novel, the person who the book's about has a diary entry. These are things that normally would have slowed the book down. And people say, I love your diary entries, my favorite part. Well, they're kind of like quotes, and it's like they were actually from the book initially, but it slowed it down.
Well, and that lets you have your first person along with your third person, right?
Well, that's the other. You're very intuitive. What happened? My first book was a first person. I had never studied writing. It was just a very natural thing. So now because I'm going to write a prequel, it has to be a third person story, and it's like, wait, I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I know how to do this well. And so I'm writing it, and it's like there's things I want you to hear in their thoughts, but I can't let you hear them. It doesn't make sense. And that's when I first did the diary entries. And I was at a book signing in northern Utah, and I remember a woman, she raised her hand and she goes, where did you find the journal that you quote? Park, and I go, whose journal? Dave Parkin's journal. Do you still have that? And I said, there is no Dave Parkin. He's a fictional character. He goes, no, you use his journal in the book. I go, ma'am, Dave Parkin is a fictional character I made up for the book. And she goes, Mr. Evans, no offense, but David Parkin's a better writer than you are.
Oh.
Well,
that's actually a great compliment.
It is. What she was responding to is like she liked the prose. It's like, yeah, that was those parts of the prose is what I put in David Parkin's diary entries, and then the rest was the story about David Parkin.
Well, this might be a kind of obscure point to pursue, but I find this very, very interesting because what you're talking about with the first person and the third person is something I think is something I've struggled with and I've seen other authors dealing with as well, because I've actually been moving personally into third person where I'm incorporating the thoughts of the characters directly into the third person prose instead of like separating it out into italics or quotes or something else like I did in my earlier books. And it's tricky because you want that immediacy of the first person, but the third person is almost a barrier to that. It has other advantages though. So
that's really intriguing, and because I'm looking at a novel right now and I love the concept. It's an adult novel, and I don't know whether to come third person or first person, so I'm playing with it right now. But with Michael Vey, I broke all the rules, and that's one thing about advertising. Advertisers break punctuation. There are no rules but sell in advertising. So if you look at, you will see horrible grammar. You'll see horrible things that, you know what I mean. You see how they play with words. Even Ford, we go further. It's just like, okay, they're making a point, or you've come a long way, baby. It's like it's an irony within itself. And so when I approached Michael Vey, it's like, well, I'm going to do both. I'm going to write first person and third person. And so when my first editor, because I was still self-published when I first did Michael Vey, and the editor was a former head of HarperCollins Children. So she looked at this and it's like, this is a freaking nightmare. You changed, you changed. She goes, I go, I know. Has it ever been done before? She goes, yeah, it's been done. You did a good job of it, but it's like, I don't even know how to approach this. And then she came back. She goes, sometimes the best solution is the easiest one. Let's break the book up into parts. And every time he's first person, and it actually worked out really well. So when he's first person, it's and then change to the third person, it's part 4, part 5, part 6. And that's why the Michael Vey books have parts, is because I'm changing the perspective.
Well, and it's probably good to give your readers a cue that you are changing so you're not
Right.
confusing them.
Yeah, yeah, because there are times that it's been a little bit confusing.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about the business side for a second. I know you self-published the Christmas Box and a number of books after that, and I find that very interesting because of my own, as you know, my own self-publishing experience. So why did you choose to self-publish in the first place, and what was that experience like for you? And also, I think you had much more success with self-publishing than most people who try it do. So I'm very curious to sort of hear how you went about it and how it worked.
I self-published because as an ad guy, I knew the book was taking. I knew when a product worked and when it didn't. And this is before we had social media. I can't imagine what Christmas Box would have done had we had social media, because it was so freaking viral.
And you didn't have
But
ebooks either then.
no, 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 no. It was way before that. We didn't even have Amazon. There was no internet. So that book, it was. I would you give someone a copy and then you'd find out it's been read by 9 people. I was on one plane ride. I gave it to someone next to me. By the time I was done, 5 people had read the book. That book. This was passing around, and they're all crying. And so I sent the book to local publishers, and I didn't even think of taking it to a big publisher. I had no idea how to get an agent. I didn't even think about agent. So I started out. I sent it to local publishers, and they all sent me rejection letters. So I get the book back. It's like, well, okay, maybe this isn't what they're used to publishing, and maybe there's nothing out there like it, but it's selling. I mean, I'm seeing this. This is selling. I put it in one store, and it sold 800 copies.
In one store.
Oh, one
Whoa.
little store. One little store in Roy, Utah. Roy, Utah. I didn't even know where Roy, Utah was. Sold 5,000 copies.
Whoa.
It's like, are there even there's not even 5,000 people in Roy, Utah. It was just, he goes, you only bought Christmas gifts. It's like, that's insane.
But again, how were you providing the books to the bookstores? I mean, were you printing them up with an offset press and regular print run? And
Yeah, what I did, I went out and I first printed up, okay, shows how naive I was. I went out and printed up 7,000 copies because I knew 7 bookstores I could get the book into. And I thought, well, the average book in a bookstore probably sells 1,000 copies. That is how naive I was. The average book in a bookstore sells 1.8 copies, according to Borders. I thought they would sell 1,000 copies, no big deal. As a matter of fact, I walk into a Barnes and Noble and I stopped the manager to ask him about my book, which managers never want to talk to you about, And he said, fine. He goes, what did you write? I wrote, it's called The Christmas Box. And he stops and he goes, you wrote that? I said, yeah. And he goes, wow, it's like outselling John Grisham's new paperback. And I go, yeah, but that's John Grisham. Like, that shows how stupid I was. It's like, well, but this is a Christmas story. Like, that's supposed to be really big. I go, how does it compare to your other Christmas stories? And he started laughing. He goes, you're selling 5 times more than every Christmas book in here combined. I go, oh, so it's doing well. It's like, yeah, it's doing well. This is not normal. And I'm like, seriously, one of my biggest sells was Kinko's Copy Centers. I mean, I went anywhere they were a client of mine in advertising. So I said, well, do you want to put these on your counter? Pretty soon I'm getting calls from the manager saying, we need more books. They're going through cases of books, of hundreds of books. It's like, you sold out already? Yeah, we need more. People are coming here. Bookstores start going to Kinko's to get the books from them.
so were you physically shipping boxes of books out of your house then, or?
Yeah, I would drive them over and drop them off. I did find a local distributor who did end up making millions of dollars off of it. I was glad it worked for them, but they were just local. And so they said, yeah, we like the book and we think you might sell 3,000 copies. And I have 7,000, 3,000. I go, is that good? He goes, oh yeah, that's what the popular local author sells. And no one knows who you are. So this is 3,000 copies is a realistic number. Well, we were selling 3,000 copies a day. I mean, it it was just crazy how quickly it was going. And so and this is the weird thing and a really great coincidence. 4 months before I came along, they were contacted by the New York Times, who said, we would like you to report. We kind of have a dearth of reporters in the West, and so we would like you to report books to us. So one week we sell 87,000 copies. Now this is a local distributor who's not in many bookstores. So they put it on the New York Times and send it off the reports. They get a call from the Times, and it's like, is this a mistake? It's like, no, 87,000 copies. It's like, we're gonna sell more. It's like, you sold 87,000 copies of one book in 1 week. Yeah. It's like, tell us, and the next thing I know, I get a call from the New York Times. It's like, is this book fiction or nonfiction? I go, it's fiction. Why? And they said, because you hit one of our lists. We just don't know which one to put you on. And so I debuted at #2 on the New York Times. This is why the publishers went crazy, because New York had heard nothing about it. All of a sudden, could you imagine being in your New York office and a book you've never heard of shows up at #2 from a publisher you've never heard of, from an author you've never heard of? These guys are, spending millions and millions of dollars putting behind books. It's like, what is this?
I think people watching this, unless you have some experience with the publishing industry, I'm not sure if you appreciate just how insane this is. I mean, from start to finish.
Exactly. It is insane. It just like, it shook them up. And so they started calling, their contacts, like, where is this book? And it was actually the president of Random House said to me, he goes, you realize you're only in 5% of the bookstores in America, and you hit #2 on the New York Times. And you're in 5% of the bookstores. I go, that's cool. Because this thing's going to be a monster. And so that's when things really exploded for me. And that's when I went from self-published. The book had already hit the New York Times. I remember, I'll never forget, I'm sitting in my little house, 700 square feet, tiny little house. And my wife's pregnant, she's in bed, and I get this phone call, and the guy goes, yes, you, the Richard Paul Evans, I'm still on the phone, you Richard Paul Evans, who wrote the book, The Christmas Box. I said, yes. He goes, I'm from HarperCollins. I'm prepared to give you $2 million today for the rights to publish it. I said, oh, no. It's like, what? No, because I'm getting all these other people calling too. And he goes, you need to get an agent. And that's when I got Lori Liss, who I work with. And that's where it started. But I had a really unique experience that the publishers were intrigued with. I got to go back and meet with all the publishers. And so I saw how different their styles were, how they thought about books. And I saw them all in 2 days.
Wow. So you went to New York City and did the rounds.
I went to New York. Yeah. Yes, I did the rounds. And I remember I was just exhausted. I'm sitting just in the room waiting. My agent's talking to someone. And I hear a woman talk to, I think it was Maureen Reagan, who at the time was the head of, I want to say Harper. And she goes, how much do you think this book's going to sell for? And she goes, I don't know, but he's going to be a very rich young man. So the initial one sold for $4.2 million in American rights just for the hardcover.
Nice. That's certainly when it was what Stephen King says. How do you know when you're a successful author? When the check clears.
Yeah.
Well, that is an amazing story. So then but you mentioned you had continued to self-publish up until Michael Vey?
No. Everything was with Simon & Schuster until then.
Oh, I see.
What happened is when I brought Michael Vey, they made an offer, and what happens in the book industry, for those who don't know, is that sometimes they'll give an advance. And the advance is based on what they think the book will sell. And so I looked at it and I thought, you hold my book in contempt. You think we'll sell 30,000 copies, the whole series? 30,000 copies there's going to be 7 books, like 5,000 copies each. That's it? In the lifetime of this book? And so at that point, I just told my agent, I said, look, I'll self-publish it. I'll sell that the first day. It's like, no way. And so I made up these copies. And like I showed you before, this is one of the first ones. You'll notice this this title, Michael Vey and the Electric Cheerleader. This is my publisher said, can we change it? This is what it ended up. Michael Vey, the Prisoner of Cell 25. Very different feeling. I'm so glad we went that way. Because the font and everything was just wrong on the title.
So do you think that self-publishing nowadays is easier than it was when you started?
It's easier and worse and harder. And I mean, it's a double-edged sword. The good news is that it's really easy to do. When I self-published, if I had not been in advertising, I couldn't do it. First of all, almost every self-published book looks like a self-published book. And I would tell people, if you can't make your book look like one of the major publishers did it, don't touch it, and do not have your cousin do the artwork. Trust me, your cousin sucks, or else he would be doing this professionally. Okay, and they always have these horrible covers, and you look at it, and they've killed themselves before it started. So, but I was in advertising, and I looked at it. I didn't have a lot of money for the cover of the Christmas box, so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go take a piece of walnut, because the book's made of walnut, and I'm going to just shoot a high contrast picture of it and use it as the background. Well, it turned out looking really classy. It was a one color. I did it in green. It looked really nice. I just put simple words, the Christmas box. People thought it was a major publisher. It looked nice. But I mean, I had the design expertise. I had advertising expertise. I knew the media in the area. And so I did a lot to promote that book. I came up with some ideas in promoting the book that no one had done before, because I was from outside the industry. So I looked at it in a different way.
Yeah, and you were willing to make the effort too, because a lot of writers, it's one thing to write the book, it's another thing to promote it. It's two different skill sets, and it takes time away from the writing. And if you're not familiar with it, I think some people just shy away from that, or don't know where to start.
Right. And that's what I mean. I was doing a lot of political campaigns. In fact, I wrote the Christmas box in a U.S. senator's office. We had just gotten him elected. So the first people who read the Christmas box were people in that office. And so we had just won the election. I said, well, here, look at this, And, I knew how to get it out there. I knew how to do it. Most people don't know how to do that, but it was still very, very hard. I had to go and print. It would take me a month to 6 weeks to get a book print. So I took it down there. I had to guess how many books would sell in advance. And when you're considering I have no money, this was a big deal. It was very, very tricky. So I was like, well, let's try 7,000 copies, because I know 7 bookstores, and I get my 7,000 copies. And it's I remember we came down. The next printing was 10,000 copies. It sold out in 3 days, and they wanted more books. It's I can't get books that fast. I can't have books in a week. I can't have books till after Christmas, and that's too late. It's probably the best thing that happened for me, though, because then we start getting stories that 2 women got in a fist fight over the last copy of a book at a store. All of a sudden, the book sold out, and I had actually bought radio commercials, which I now couldn't use. So I actually went on the air and said, "Thanks for buying the book. It's sold out," and then everyone had to have the book. People are offering $50 for a copy of this little paperback.
So it was the takeaway.
Yeah. So that's why I say it was hard. I mean, it was hard, but I didn't have anything to judge it against, so I was willing to work really hard. Now I'll go into a classroom, and the kids will say, "Yeah, our assignment this week is to have a book published." It's the New York Times wrote, there are no unpublished authors anymore.
Well, and today you have the print on demand services, which is what I used back in the day, and of course Amazon and the ebooks. But that said, all the marketing in the world won't sell a book to people who don't want to read it. It has to be something they actually want to read. Right. And the other thing is, because now, I mean, back then there weren't that many self-published books, because not many people had the confidence and could afford it. Now there's millions. Literally, there's millions of self-published books. So that's why I say the good news, bad news. The good news, it's easier. The bad news is it's easier. And so how do you differentiate yourself from that guy who's selling his book for 35 cents? Yeah, makes perfect sense. How has your experience been different writing adult novels versus young adult? Obviously, the audience is different, but do you find that the reader response from the young adult readers is different? And
I love writing for kids.
Yeah, I could see.
I just love it. So kids, they buy into the world, and it means so much more to them. And so the energy they bring is nuts. It's so cute, the things they say, and they're so honest. So if anyone wants to find out where you are on book tour, or just where you are on the internet, where would they go for information? Well, you can go to my webpage, richardpaulevans.com, or my Facebook page, my fan page. I just want to thank you again for doing this interview. This has been a real pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you. And I hope everyone watching has enjoyed this as well, and be sure to tune in next time.